Everything new, every possibility, every innovation always comes bundled with uncertainty. You have to step into the unknown to get to that new thing. You have to take a risk. And if you think about your own life, this is true. And the other thing that's true is uncertainty will happen to you. Even in a stable environment, generally, things will go different than you planned. And the question is, as I face that hand of cards I've been dealt, and a lot of times we wish we were not dealt that hand of cards, and we have that experience in spades. The question then is, though, how am I going to play that hand?
That made me think of the quantum nature of, that things are random and that we can't control everything. In that way, we love uncertainty, but there are uncertainties that are not beautiful. There are horrible periods of uncertainty where you're waiting to get results back from like diagnoses, or when someone's life ends and you don't know how you're going to live without this person. Like, there are uncertainties that we don't champion and celebrate or want. But even when those things happen to us, what we've really found is that these tools can help you navigate that process, even of grief and frustration or sorrow, because you're attending to this whole human side of yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Weeks. Welcome to another episode of the Bounce Podcast. My guests today are Nathan and Susannah Fur. Nathan earned his Ph.D. from Stanford's Technology Ventures program and is an associate professor of strategy at INSEE, one of the world's leading graduate business schools located in France. Susannah is a designer and art historian who founded a women's clothing line inspired by her research of the intricate embroidery of Dutch women. Today, our discussion centers around uncertainty, specifically around their book, The Upside of Uncertainty, a guide to finding possibility in the unknown. I've been assembling tactics for years now, accumulating a sort of mental toolbox for dealing with challenges. And uncertainty is challenging for what it lacks, concrete information. So how do we act when we don't know fully what we're dealing with? And normally, we don't act. We might freeze or delay because of a lack of certainty. So dealing with uncertainty has a lot to do then with mindset, since we may not know what we will have to handle, and thus we don't know the actions that we need to take. So my question is, what frame of mind will help us act or move forward in the face of uncertainty? Aside from your decision-making skills, and we've talked a lot about that on the podcast, but we all know making decisions in a fear state is suboptimal as well, hence the challenge here. So on the show, we discuss these things and much more, like uncertainty, its origins, and our evolutionary hardwiring. We talk about why a lot of this is what makes up what we call stress in our lives. And we talk about fragility and the unexpected black swan problem. And then we dive headlong into their thesis, which is that uncertainty has an upside to it. Then we move into the very practical area of the tools they've developed. And a lot of them are reframes. And some of the tools we talk about are the adjacent possible, the infinite game, one of my favorites, aplomb, doubting self-doubt, which is pretty cool. And then the uncertainty balancers, things that offset ambiguity in other areas of our lives. And then we talk a little bit about creating an uncertainty manifesto. And I think if you do listen, you will come to the conclusion that things may be uncertain. You can't change that. But we can have a little more certainty as to the fact that we can handle it. So that said, here's Nathan and Susannah. Thank you so much for coming on. This is the get to know you part. What are you both currently doing? Nathan, I'm assuming you're still professor at the INSEE, if I'm saying that correctly?
INSEE. So folks don't know it as well.
I didn't say it correctly.
INSEE. Folks don't know as well inside of the US, but it is actually the number one international business school. They don't know it because we're only a business school, and we were founded to be the Harvard of Europe. So, whereas the big companies recruited Harvard and Stanford in the US, they recruited INSEAD in Asia and in Europe. So that's really the focus, is a global focus. So I'm a professor there and working on projects, writing papers, and continuing to develop these ideas.
Before this, I'm more of an entrepreneur. I like to do design projects and creative projects. I am creating kind of what I'm envisioning to be a retreat center in Normandy, where I want to teach things even as from uncertainty, to biodynamic gardening and regenerative ecosystems. So
And what about what you just launched?
Yeah, we just launched yesterday an online course that's a companion to the book. So every single tool that we wrote about has 2 modules where we record slides where we explain it. A lot of the examples are the ones from the book, some added, some we didn't share because it was in the book and we figure they'll get it there. But it's really exciting because there's a community with it. We're hoping that it just gives one more way to interact with the content.
And by the way, I'll put it in the show notes and
Perfect.
point everybody to it. So here we are, 2023. Wow. And I never knew about the World Uncertainty Index. And it's the world in the sense, I'm looking at it from US bias because I'm looking at the charts. Man, it goes off. The uncertainty index goes off the charts during the pandemic or right at the end of 2019 or into 2020 Q1. Now I see it ticking back up again, but it's way, in the last few years, it's incredibly high. And I can attest personally to the uncertainty. Especially ending 2022, inflation through the roof. With the stock market has been in the tank. A lot of uncertainty. So the timing of this book is almost prescient, but you wrote it before the pandemic. And I think I read you guys had your own journey through uncertainty because you left Stanford and moved to Paris and then everything fell apart. Tell us about that.
No, absolutely. And it seems prescient, but it's actually because, as you mentioned, the World Uncertainty Index, what that shows is, by the way, it only tracks political and economic uncertainty. There are other ways we could think about it, but that shows an upward trend over several decades. And so, 20 years ago when I was, or however many years ago when I was starting my PhD at Stanford, I was really curious about this idea of uncertainty. I felt like you could see it was on the rise. You could see it was fundamental to creation and innovation. And yet we had very few frameworks and tools to wrestle with that. And so all of my academic work at some level is about this question of uncertainty. But the thing that was really open and curious to me most of all was how do you do it at a personal level? Because I'm not naturally gifted or great at uncertainty. In fact, I'm stressed out by it. And so as I interview these innovators over the last 20 years, I wanted to understand, well, how did they do it? What did they do? And could I learn from them? And that began to evolve into a formal set of interviews and questions and gathering research to try to ask this question that I now realize is incredibly fundamental, which is we live in a world with a lot of uncertainty, but very few of us were taught the tools to navigate that well. We had this cool experience. We're in the National Gallery in London, and there was a special exhibit on a very famous American painter, Winslow Homer. And I remember standing before this very iconic painting of the veteran in the field. And so it's a Civil War veteran, and the commentator, on the side is saying, this painting represents this period of deep uncertainty in the U.S. when the nation has fought itself and Abraham Lincoln has been assassinated. And it just struck me, oh my gosh, uncertainty is not really new. That's the thing. It's not new. They're talking about the uncertainty they face. So what was different? And I think what was different, if we're honest, is there were a set of tools people had to deal with it. And it was called religion. It was called community. It was called routine. And what's changed in our modern world is much of that has been uprooted. And so we're in this world of increased change, I would say, compared to then, with very few tools. And I think if I get kind of philosophical on you, the angst of the modern era, what all these philosophers are sometimes really touching on is, I live in this uncertain world and I don't know how to make sense of it. And I think we're in the middle of a period where different disciplines are coming together to say, well, wait, how do we do that? Psychology is doing a great job of that, but there are other fields as well. Strategy, I'm from strategy. We're asking what are the strategies for a world of uncertainty? And so I think our book, The Upside of Uncertainty, is really just the part of the conversation that needs to be had at a much more significant level about how do we give people tools to face uncertainty? Because uncertainty, even if it wasn't on the rise, even let's imagine you found a chart and said, it's declining radically and you could prove it beyond all doubt. Here's what would still be true. Everything new, every possibility, every innovation always comes bundled with uncertainty. You have to step into the unknown to get to that new thing. You have to take a risk. And if you think about your own life, this is true. And the other thing that's true is uncertainty will happen to you. Even in a stable environment, generally, things will go different than you planned. And the question is, as I face that hand of cards I've been dealt, and a lot of times we wish we were not dealt that hand of cards, and we have that experience in spades. The question then is, though, how am I going to play that hand? So how do I find the possibility that's in that uncertainty that's been dealt to me? So that, I think, is the fundamental question. And so uncertainty going up or down, it's a deeper issue. It's tools for facing the unknown.
Have you guys seen Stutz yet?
Mm-mm.
It's a documentary, and it's this psychiatrist who is interviewed. Basically, talks about tools he created in psychiatry to help people with negative emotion and dealing with life in general. And what was interesting is the aspect of tools, where he talks about how in his practice, people didn't have weeks to wait to kind of process. He's like, I felt like early on I failed. If somebody comes to my office and they're miserable and they leave miserable, he's like, I had to come up with something. I really love the aspect of tools, heuristics that you have in your book. And you talk about uncertainty. And to me, that's stress, right? That's pretty much stress. And you talk about the evolutionary hardwiring that we have, which is true where, there could be a saber-tooth tiger behind this bush and the rustling. So I don't know. It's unknown until I find out or not. So I'm always on high alert. But evolution is trying to protect us, right? This is survival mechanisms. But now they're working on jobs that are no longer needed, right? There's not a tiger outside the front door. And the reason I'm mentioning what you mentioned in the book is because I think people, and I know I do, fall back on, if I don't worry about this thing, it's not going to happen. Or if I'm not freaked out emotionally, then my effort is going to be less than a 10 that's needed to make that thing not happen that I don't know is going to happen. You know what I mean? So, and I think we need to discuss that it's going to have the opposite effect, right? It's going to freeze you. You're not going to be innovative, to your point. If you're on high alert, there's going to be mistakes made and so on and so forth, or nothing is going to happen.
I think one thing that was interesting about the pandemic, so as Nathan said, decades long interviewing people, and it was really going to be a book about how do these path breakers find these amazing ways to go through uncertainty and get to possibility. But when the pandemic hit, it became very clear that the uncertainty we don't choose also needs to be treated. And so we had these tools, and we started needing to see, can these tools work for both types of uncertainty? So this thing you're talking about, where someone's being bold and wants to go out on the frontier and figure something new, say they want to do a startup, or they're going to go into a new relationship, or they're going to change geography. Those uncertainties, a lot of people just think, oh, I'm not good at those, so I'm going to live in the same town. They don't think it's available to them to actually get better at going after cool uncertainty. And so we really want those people that don't think they're good at it to realize, hey, I could apply some of these, because honestly, we really believe, and after our experience as expats, getting on a frontier is going to look different for everyone. But if we don't make change, our lives do kind of shrink around us. When we don't try anything new, things get less and less interesting. And in fact, one of my favorite quotes was this idea that the more we try to control and manage our lives, the less life we have to live. Like, it gets really kind of concrete, and humans actually, we're wired to fear uncertainty, but we also need it. We talk about that in the book. One of our tools is reverse insurance. Humans thrive actually on surprise and newness and needing to be kind of creative. That feels good to us. That's how we thrive, actually, is when we are.
Susannah, you said something so fast, but so interesting. And I want to make sure I caught it, because we're already in discussing uncertainty the way we are. We're already reframing. We're kind of pulling that out and looking at it differently, because you were saying, I think you said something like, if you don't choose the uncertainties or something along the line, which is an interesting take on uncertainty, because it seems like there's a couple of levels. The things that we think bad potentially are going to happen, but we're uncertain. but we feel are pressing on us, and maybe there's a decision that we have to make and we're uncertain of it, so we're postponing that decision. But there's also this, maybe life is going along just fine, but there are things that we're not proactively doing, like seeking in the area of uncertainty to say, oh, okay, what if I did this or that? The way you put it, we're not choosing some uncertainties. And then you went further and said, this is the path to an interesting life, to seeking the unknown.
I think I was using one of our reframe tools, which is frontiers. So I was saying, if you're not on any frontiers, and what I mean by that is a frontier is just cool. Any place where you haven't been yet, like on the side close to you, away from the frontier. It's all the stuff you do every day, just without thinking automatic pilot. But getting on a frontier could be as simple as thinking, I've never been to a ballet or an opera or to a live theater. So this is the kind of uncertainty that's not going to radically change your life. But we recently went to a ballet that kind of changed our lives. And it made us think we want to do that more often. In fact, we're even considering bringing our kids with us to another European city nearby to see it again. Because we're like, did that really happen? That sounds kind of woo-woo or abstract. But my point is just frontiers make life interesting and meaningful. And some will be like, we could have gone and said, no, we're not going to do that. And we'll switch to a different frontier. It might be at work, creating a new project and saying, could I work on this on half a day a week? That could be a frontier. But yeah, everybody needs courage to go after something. And a lot of people we're finding feel nervous about uncertainty always. Like uncertainty equals bad.
The thesis then of the book is the upside. I think in the book, you guys see uncertainty as a beautiful thing, which is a great reframe. And in the frontier reframe, just the word, that's genius, because just the word, puts you in a place of kind of exciting courage, hey, what's beyond the horizon? What can I explore? Kind of like this being an astronaut or what have you in your own life, launching into the unknown into your own life. So that's very cool. And I also thought about Nassim Taleb's book on the anti-fragile. And he makes a point in that book about, and I think most people are familiar with the book, but this idea of being more than resilient, you're being anti-fragile. Obviously the opposite is fragile, but he says that if you suppress randomness, which is uncertainty, you increase fragility. And randomness, he makes the case that randomness is the root cause of serendipity, to your point. It has that upside.
We love his work. And he makes that core argument for why uncertainty could be a good thing. But one of the things that, again, I came away hungry for, that I didn't feel satisfied, was, again, how. And so our book is all about how. So when you guys were talking about frontiers, for example, that's one of the tools in the reframe section. So reframe is one of those categories of things to do, which is, okay, we got this evolutionary wiring to make us afraid in the face of uncertainty. If uncertainty and possibility really are two sides of the same coin, like we are trying to argue that any possibility you want is going to come with uncertainty, and or any uncertainty that happens to you, it's going to have some possibility that you could still pull out of that. So if that's true, that they're two sides of the same coin, if you frame it in terms of the uncertainty, you will ignite all that fear that you have in evolutionary wiring. It's not your fault, but it's just that, saber-tooth tiger protection system. But we don't need a saber-tooth tiger protection system anymore. You are not going to get eaten by going out your front door. So if we can frame in terms of the possibility, we can kind of decrease that anxiety we feel. And so that's the category. Now, how do I do that? And so frontiers is there's actually 42 tools in the book, but one of those 42, and it's saying most of us see the frontier as a scary place because that's the boundary between what I know and what I don't know. But what innovators do differently is they frame the frontier as the place they're going to do their best work. So for example, you're at work, you get maybe invited, potentially they're just feeling the waters for doing something new. A lot of times people will be like, oh, I don't want to do that because if it goes poorly, then that might reflect badly on me and my career. Or you've got a choice between two activities this weekend, and one of them's kind of on the frontier. You haven't done that before. So you kind of just say, well, maybe I'll just go back to that familiar thing because I know that won't go wrong. That's like a microcosm of what we're talking about. So what what we learn from these creators and innovators is they frame that frontier as, no, that's where I'm going to do my best work. That challenging project at work, that's where I'm going to do my best work. That new thing, sometimes that new thing on the weekend, you shouldn't do it. But sometimes, like, Susannah mentioned this ballet. I mean, I just flown in, I think,
you were
somewhere. Yeah, I was jet lagged. It was crazy. I'm like, the last thing I want to do is go to a ballet, right? And it was like a total reinvention of this old story with this, gentleman who, comes from India, brought his, classical dance style from Northern India into this classical ballet. And like the result was like explosive. And I walked away wanting to change my life and live a better life. I mean, it was just like, whoa. And that doesn't happen every time you step on the frontier. But I just we use that silly example of entertainment just to show that, that's what they're doing. They're saying, okay, there's something new. Sometimes you don't have to do everything new. You don't have to step on every frontier. But remember, that might be where you encounter your best work. And that's framing in terms of the possibility, not the uncertainty.
Were you writing this book for two audiences? When I say two, I mean the person and the corporation, because they're certainly applicable. And maybe you take care of the one, the other takes care of itself. In other words, you get the person to embrace uncertainty that carries forward into the business.
I would love to address that really quick. It's definitely a situation where using these business and managerial examples and interviews.
But many other types.
And then we added more, but to show that these are humans underneath those massive breakthroughs and scientific leaps, or just cool and quirky startups. They are human beings and they had to figure out how to navigate it. And so when I joined the project, I said, Nathan, let's write this to the human inside the manager, because managers are humans. We've done a lot of research on just even, reading post our book being finished and printed and everything. So many articles are coming out about how like CEO stress and anxiety trickles down. Or during the pandemic, Brian Chesky gave these amazing examples of leading a company when 80% of their business disappeared in 8 weeks. And his reframing of this is when great companies are forged in moments of crisis. And he had to do layoffs, but he did it with so much heart and soul. And he really saw it as he needed to calm himself. He needed to quiet his own thoughts so that he could act from a place of principles and values. And if you don't have a leader that knows how to navigate uncertainty on their own saber-toothed tiger wiring, which they carry, they're going to have chaos at work.
And to the point of the background or context, where this, I'm assuming the book came out of, is things that are innovations. Those are uncertain experiments, right? Those are experiments where we don't, maybe not, this is going to work out. And if we don't try something new or innovate to improve, someone else will do it for us. And we need to do this. But I mean, that those are fraught with uncertainty. And a lot of times little experiments or new product launches don't happen because of the calculus for the uncertainty. Well, we don't have a promise it's going to work out, so let's not spend the money. So,
which is so ironic if you think about it, right? Because another way of saying this is uncertainty is the moat that protects a new opportunity. If there were no uncertainty, if we're risk-free, we'd all grab it, right? We'd all do it.
What a great point. So another way of looking at uncertainty and trying things is, and I think you guys frame it, is just this learning opportunity. It's like the results outside of a concrete physical thing is me figuring out something. And that's a skill set that goes beyond that result, right? So that's another benefit of embracing uncertainty, is like, hey, well, let me learn from this whole, going down the hallway, turning on the lights and seeing what's there.
Yeah, Larry, since you're talking about skill sets, I want to add, and I want to touch back on this question of individual versus company and team. I fully believe that in the future, we could talk about uncertainty ability, like a capability, like emotional intelligence or your financial acumen, marketing capabilities. But we just don't have that yet. So we think about the direction of the flow of knowledge. One problem with starting with, say, how do corporations do this well first is corporations don't do this well. They do it terribly. It's not a skill set they've generally learned to cultivate in their organizations. They could do it, but the flow of knowledge tends to be from one or several instances to become a discipline. So we think about if you went to any manufacturing company in the world, they would probably know or use some aspect of lean manufacturing. But it didn't start because there were 15 companies doing lean manufacturing and we pulled the best 100 of 1,000 and found out what they did. No, it was like one person inside of Toyota saying, oh, wait a minute. And that actually came from a set of ideas earlier. And so I think it also, if we thought about this, if we imagine this as a practice or a capability, the first clues about how to do this are starting with the individuals who have learned to do this well. And then we're able to, and that's one of the things I'm kind of hoping to do is suss out, and we've done a little bit of this, but suss out, well, how do you do this at an organizational level? So we definitely see some anecdotal stuff about that.
Yeah, I interviewed Annie Dukes, who wrote the book Thinking in Bet. She won the World Series of Poker, and she went down this whole decision skill making, how to make better decisions. But she talks about resulting. And it's a term where she says poker players get hooked on who's going to win or lose, and what she calls resulting. She actually said they're addicted to resulting, like, hey, I've got to repeat this particular result or what have you. And it made me think of maybe some form of addiction to certainty.
And I think that's the secret of innovators. I wouldn't say that they start out on average being so much more adept at uncertainty or loving it more or something like that, or being more capable. But I think what they learn is that secret, which is kind of, we have these little pieces. I joke about it as like, grandmother wisdom or little that just hang around at the edges, like a phrase like no risk, no reward. We've all heard that, right? But that's like basically what innovators have learned is like, okay, I took some chances and some of them didn't work out, but for the most part, what worked out was absolutely worth it. And so the question then is, how do we do that? Where you talk about anti-fragility. Oh, gee, that makes sense that it's possible that like we're stronger because of variation, and that, or like Susannah was talking about, a world of certainty is actually incredibly boring. So you've got this evolutionary instinct that is driving you to make everything certain so you're not afraid. And you're really creating the most boring, most uninteresting life. And she mentioned reverse insurance. That was actually a term that came from the head of I won't name it, but a major gambling organization. He said, oh, what we call our product behind closed doors is reverse insurance, which is, we have to be careful. This is actually a pretty ethical actor. They said, we have to be careful because our prime target is that person who is like, got such a boring life, they will pay us. It will pay us just for the chance that something different could happen. And that's just curious when you think about it that way.
So I want to get into the tools. I just picked a few here I'd like to ask you about. But Susannah, I think I missed it. Tell me again about reverse insurance.
So yeah, Nathan was just hitting on this idea. We called it that because this gambling organization told us behind closed doors, they called their gambling system operation reverse insurance. And it's this need for humans. So when we think of insurance, we pay money to protect the things that we have. So our assets or like against our health. Yeah. And reverse insurance is this idea that you would pay to kind of inject a surprise. So gambling is reverse because it's like, my life is so boring or things aren't working and I have no hope and I don't see an out, or, they want to pull down some magic, exit strategy or something. But a cooler, better way to create reverse insurance is just this reframing of, I need it. I need uncertainty. And earlier you said, so do you guys think uncertainty is beautiful? And that made me think of the quantum nature of, that things are random and that we can't control everything. In that way, we love uncertainty, but there are uncertainties that are not beautiful. There are horrible periods of uncertainty where you're waiting to get results back from like diagnoses, or when someone's life ends and you don't know how you're going to live without this person. Like there are uncertainties that we don't champion and celebrate or want. But even when those things happen to us, what we've really found is that these tools can help you navigate that process, even of grief and frustration or sorrow, because you're attending to this whole human side of yourself. And so you are first reframing the thing as my life, I'm still alive. So it might be one of gratitude where you say, what do I still have? And so even the worst uncertainties that happen to us have upsides when we are buoyed up by these tools that help us not see it as now our whole life is over or we're such losers. Sometimes people make huge mistakes and feel completely unable to rise above that. But uncertainty management frames would teach you, no, I'm not a loser. That idea was bad, but I can go on from this.
We're not here to say uncertainty does not have a downside, but do you need our help with that? I don't think so. I think you need our help finding the upside.
Yeah, I think of, Susannah, when you said the reverse insurance, haunted houses and roller coaster, things that inject a little bit of fear. We seek those out,
we do.
For some of these reasons. So tell me about another tool you have here, the adjacent possible. I just love the phrasing of that. But
yeah, well, it's borrowed from biology, actually, and this idea that a lot of things evolve from something before it that was hovering nearby. So the idea is feathers, which were meant initially for warmth, became flight. So it's these things that can evolve to be something else. But in a human life, an adjacent possible is anything that maybe is just hovering, but we're not seeing it. And the idea is that we can open a door by becoming aware of like, what else could be possible in this moment? And by opening that door into a room, then you unlock other doors. And Stephen Johnson writes about this, and he talks about it like a castle. Like you can't go from the point here to like 10 doors down. It requires someone who's willing to go through these doors and keep finding the next adjacent possible. That requires you kind of brush up against it. And so what does this look like? Well, we share many examples in the book. One of my favorites is the A-Linker, which is this beautiful system that kind of replaced wheelchairs for individuals who still have the use of their legs. And the woman who found this and created this, kind of even just funding it on a personal credit cards, was because she was with her mom, who they were walking somewhere outside one day, and someone passed in a wheelchair, or even maybe it said, over my dead body, would I ever be with one? Would I ever use one of those? And she thought, oh, wow, that's so intense of feeling for something. What if she's going to need that one day? And she researched and found a huge percentage of people in wheelchairs have the use of their legs. So she created a trike system, which lets them use their legs. It puts them up higher, so they sit at the same height as like someone who's walking. And it's just been a revolutionary, beautiful thing. But again, kind of an adjacent possible, not the weirdest thing, not the most intensely unique idea, but it needed to be looked at and treated and cared about into being.
So detail for me a little more the aplomb, doubting self-doubt. I like that on the face of it, but how do I apply that? How do I do that?
So I think the core message is that there's a myth that people who do new things are all courage and confidence. They don't ever doubt themselves. And what's wrong with me, the reason why I don't do something new is because I doubt whether I can do it. And so all we tried to do is unpack the commonness of self-doubt, even among people who are innovators and creators and designers. And so one of my, there are a couple great examples of this. One of these we mentioned was, but I think it's just so epic, is John Steinbeck, who wrote several critical novels. But while he was writing The Grapes of Wrath, this is a Nobel Prize winner, kept a journal that he didn't want anybody but his sons to see. And in it, he talked about how he felt as he wrote this, like one of the few great masterpieces of American literature. And all he writes about is how he can't do it. I'm not a real writer. I'm no good at writing. I can't do this. I mean, the self-doubt is just so incredible. And I guess I always touch back on, for me, one of the most personally inspirational stories is of Richard Feynman, who won the Nobel Prize in physics, one of the pioneers of quantum physics. And I think the way his story evolves is instructive for all of us. We went to his Ph.D. He was in Los Alamos in the race to create the first atomic weapon. So it was, incredibly important, but exhausting experience. And while he's there, his wife, it was kind of the love of his life, passes away from tuberculosis just a few years before the treatment's available. So he emerges from this in what we would now call exhausted, emotionally, intellectually, just burned out, but they didn't really have the language for that. So he gets a job at Cornell and he's teaching, But a professor's supposed to do research, not just teach. But he has no motivation to do any research. And he feels really bad about himself. He's actually, after teaching, he'd go to the library, he'd read like 1001 Arabian Nights and stuff like that. He's just kind of fooling around. And he starts to get job offers because physicists are in scarce supply at that time. And he talks about how every job offer he gets makes him feel bad because he's such a fraud. And then he gets this job offer from the Princeton Institute of Energy, which is where Einstein works and von Neumann works and these legends. And he's like, it was so absurd to get this offer that something in me like cracked. And he said, you know what? I give up. I am no longer trying to live up to other people's expectations of me. I am just going to do what I think is interesting. I don't care if somebody else did it before. I don't care if it's not important. And he says, 1 week later, he was in the dining hall at Cornell and some goofball throws a plate up into the air. And the Cornell plates, they have a little Cornell University emblem in the middle. And he notices that the emblem is spinning at a different rate than the plate is wobbling while it's in the air. And he says, I wonder if I could calculate that. I mean, who would think that? But Feynman thinks that, that's curious. And so he goes and he calculates and he comes up with a 2-to-1 ratio. And he takes it back to his department chair. It was Hans Bethe, also won a Nobel Prize, so not like some lightweight. And Hans Bethe just chastises him, says, Feynman, why are you doing this? Who cares? And Feynman says, that's right. Who cares? I'm going to do what I think is interesting. And he said, but the thing is, as I started to play around and follow my curiosity, this led to that, which led to that. And pretty soon I was working on the old questions I'd been curious about at the start of my PhD. And then pretty soon I was working on this and that. And he said, by the way, the work for which I won the Nobel Prize about the wobble of electrons in orbit, it all started with that plate. And why do I love that? It just shows that the greats have self-doubt. In fact, research suggests that 70% of people have imposter syndrome and that it's not a reason to not try. And especially if you're trying because it's something you're curious about. And so aplomb is about doubting that self-doubt that is so natural for so many people.
And not only doubting your self-doubt, but standing firm in the sense of, this is what I bring. And if it's just your curiosity or the thing that you care about, that is enough. It comes from an old French for the plumb line, which is the steady and consistent.
Well, the plumb line was you'd hang lead from a string to get a straight line. And that's the plumb line.
And the aplomb of a person is their core self. And I think one thing I got to experience with joining Nathan, I mean, he's written several books. He's been teaching for a long time and speaking. And all of a sudden I was like hitched into this world of needing to be on stage and give workshops. And I was a little stressed. And then I totally thought of the aplomb tool. And basically for myself, it was just be me. I'm not going to try to be him. I'm not going to act like I have a PhD from Stanford because I don't. And ultimately, I think a lot of times people feel like they have to try harder to be something that doesn't actually really mirror or reflect who they really are. And then you're out of your league because you're trying to do something else. So really coming back into this aplomb, which is this self-confidence, but kind of the poise, not in feeling like you have to do more, but showing up as yourself.
I would add to that, the poise, and we draw this from Feynman, and you draw this from Steinbeck and from the other stories, is the willingness to try and the willingness to learn. So I was struck, Larry, by when you talked about bringing AI into this, software you've created. Now it's kind of frightening, right? So you could either A, avoid it, or B, go into it pretending like you know what you're doing, but really you've got a lot of self-doubt and you feel like an imposter. So your brain energy is all spent up and like making it look like you know what you're doing. Or the aplomb approach would be to focus on the learning.
Which sounds like that's what you're doing.
That's soon as I made that switch, I don't care what's going to happen. I just want to kind of figure this out. How does this work? Blah, 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 blah. And you get excited about it. What I liked about your story was the toucan Sam, follow your nose is like, if we could just encourage people to run down their curiosity, go there and see what happens. Once I left Google, one of the things I've been trying to do is honor my ideas. Now, when I say this is a very personal thing, like, okay, how this is going to work out, this idea, okay, it's on paper. Let me see where this goes. Let's just either attempt, try, do a test, something, right? And it doesn't have to work out to honor it. I just have to try it or put something forward. So I love the aplomb. I love that. And I love that story, which brings me to the next thing, because I was trying to figure out, because Susannah, you said aplomb came up, doubting your self-doubt about being on stage or doing your workshops. I guess these tools are a toolbox, and they interlock, and or some of them kind of build on the other, because I was thinking, well, how do I, in the moment of the self-doubt, remind myself to doubt the self-doubt? But one of the ways I was thinking is you have these kind of affirmations. You call them an uncertainty manifesto. And I thought that would be a good way. I loved it because it's kind of, there's more to that in the book, but you also have little statements, kind of like affirmations, right? One of them is, I'm curious about the possibility waiting for me beyond the uncertainty I currently face, because that could help me if I'm repeating that to myself every day, or if I write that down on a card. And then another one is, even better, because it's a kind of a heuristic. Uncertainty attends every possibility. So, there's a possibility, I'm flipping it again. This is a reframe. I'm feeling uncertainty. Oh, wait, there's a possibility attached here, right? That's what, it's kind of the same thing, two sides of the same coin. So anyway, I love those. I love the uncertainty manifesto, which is one of your tools. You also have uncertainty balancers you talk about, where you offset ambiguity in other areas by having some kind of certainty in your life, family, friends, what have you. And then you say this, take on two projects. One should be riskier than the other to ensure the focus does not lie on the riskier one for too long. Is there anything you want to say about any of those that I mentioned?
Maybe I'll say something about that two projects piece, and maybe Susannah can say something about the uncertainty balancer.
But we are definitely in the priming category. So we've talked a ton, mostly about reframe. And this is priming. And it's good, because priming is how you prepare yourself to go into active uncertainty facing.
Yeah. And I just wanted to tell the audience that, there are many more tools in the action stage, or the doing, right? So we're in the priming. So, and we're not going to get onto it. I push people to the book. And I wanted to focus on this part of it just because it's mindset to me, right? It's like, hey, wait a minute. There's something about insight, and we're taking in uncertainty and putting some light. We're scrutinizing it. We're putting light on it and saying, hey, wait a minute. This is not bad. This doesn't mean bad. That's why I'm focusing on maybe what you call the priming part of it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I think what's cool about once you have that reframe down, it doesn't mean it's going to be perfectly there. And so priming tools help you keep going back, like you said, and flipping it back to the reframe, because that wiring's pretty significant. And so we need things that then bolster up that reframed perspective. So go ahead and you handle the personal real options.
Yeah. So the thing you said about doing two projects at once, when you do this research, there's always a moment of like the light bulb goes on, or you kind of like the pieces come together. And for me, one of those was interviewing Ben Feringa, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2016. It was just such a fun interview. He really emphasized, he won the Nobel Prize for his work on molecular machines. So if we read a science fiction article about one day we'll have robots running around in our blood, curing cancer and things like that, it would be based on what he created. So when we talked to him about uncertainty, he just loved it, because listen, science is all uncertainty. Everything I do is uncertainty. And so we had this rich conversation about how do you help yourself and your students to deal with that. And one of the things he talked about is he said, you never want to have just one foot to stand on. He said, if you only have this really uncertain project, you'll actually get trapped in it, because everything's riding in that. You'll follow that down too long rather than changing and adjusting as you should. So I always counsel my students to have a second, maybe less uncertain project, and to get certainty out of the portfolio of uncertainties. And really what he was tapping in there is a very common wisdom in my field of strategy, in the field of finance, which is this idea of real options, that you want to have several options open so that you can take the option that works. But after that interview with Ben Feringa, which was really about personal real options, I couldn't help but make an observation. So the key piece of advice is to do several things at once. So you said differently, don't have all your eggs in one basket kind of thing. But the real dilemma, I think, for all of us is that we have all our eggs in the basket of the certain option. And we are not taking a personal real option on the uncertain ones, on the risky things. So what I loved about when you said, honor my ideas, what I heard is, you know what? Maybe I need to take a little optionality on it. Maybe I need to try that. And there's some very functional ways that you can do this. So we talk about creators who do things like they make it visual. So they put up pictures of their idea, or they create a physical space where they can go work on their idea to honor that idea, or said differently, to make it a real option. But this is like, it's kind of an antidote for the deferred life fallacy, which is one day I will do the thing I care about. But the problem is, for many of us, that day gets deferred way too long or never comes. And so the personal real options is, it's less binary. So I really encourage people to take some energy into the uncertain thing.
I'm struggling with, it just surfaced for me. I didn't think about it, but wow, this is a big, so I want to throw an adult prom. This is silly, right? I want to throw an adult prom.
I love
1985. Listen to this. 1985. You are dressed 85 or 80s. We're playing for real, folks. When you come,
balloon archway, balloons.
Balloon archway. It's going to be, there's a stage like a whole high school. You come, you got to send me, I'm going to have a platform where you send me your high school picture, and that'll be your badge. I'm going to have an actress on the front. This is actress who is taking your tickets, but she's going to act like she knew you or know you, right? So the whole thing. I found actors that look like Christopher Lloyd, Michael J. Fox. They're going to run through the crowd, just occasionally run through the crowd saying, "Where's Marty? Where's Marty?" And then Marty's going to run through the crowd saying, "Anybody seen Doc? Anybody seen Doc?" I'm going to have a DeLorean out front. Look, this thing is done in my head.
It has to happen.
So this is last year I had the idea. I have not booked it because this is what I'm thinking. I've got this picture of an empty auditorium, or like just my friends. It just resurrected as we were talking about this. I'm like, I know the venue. I've already talked to the person. I haven't booked it. You know what I mean? There's just this, there's an uncertainty. This is just funny that I'm talking to you and it just came in my head. It's like, wait a minute, Larry.
Yeah.
I think it's the physical, I'm so comfortable with digital, right? This is a event. This is something that has to manifest in the, I don't know. It's weird.
So let me just play with this.
Counsel me.
This personal real options thing.
Yes, doctor.
No. Let's have some fun. So let's say you went and you booked the thing and you hired the actors and you bought the balloons and all that. How would you sell tickets to this event?
I've already got that. I'm going to do Evites. I'm going to do a Facebook. I've already got that. So what I thought, Nathan, was I'm going to go ahead and pre-sell. I'm going to see.
Exactly.
Yes, I'm just going to do the
personal real options.
The old validation of, let's just see. I've only got 300 tickets. Come on, let's just see. Right? I could always something.
Right. That's transforming it from all in because you put money on the venue. You contracted the actors. That's all in. Personal real options is, well, you're going to sell those tickets with Facebook and Evites and all that, your social network anyway. So pretend the event is happening, set a date. You haven't, or
the pretend frame. It's the pretend frame. That's a new tool. I love that. Pretend it's happened. I love that.
Transform into an option. If you sell enough tickets, you pull the lever and say, let's do it. And if you end up with the equivalent of an empty room, you just say, well, I'm glad that was an option. I only spent the money on the Evites.
I love pretend I'm going to do it. I like that. I can pretend, right? By the way, you're both invited. Special tickets.
I think you might be there.
I'm going to have King and Queen. I'm going to choose King and Queen. The whole thing. I'm going all in with this. That's what I'm doing.
By the way,
I'm going to be thinking about this.
If that works, I'm doing every year. I'm doing a 65, 75, 95, you name it.
Yeah.
I've got a question that's kind of off topic here, but you guys work together. You've written this book together. How long have you been married?
26 years.
What's the secret? You look like this ideal couple. Is it always just been easy, or is this, you guys have?
No.
So
it's the real deal. So it's, in fact, we talk about it a lot. I think just last night we were walking our dog in, misty, dark rain, tired, but in a good mood. And I was saying, Esther Perel, that marriage and kind of sex therapist, she talks about how like most people have 3 relationships or 3 marriages. And she said, some people will do them all with the same person. And some people will have, someone that they were with, and then maybe someone else that they have children with or career time with, and then, retirement. And I was saying, I think the reason that we have held on is that we both really cared about ideas and kind of a more meaningful reason for living. Like we're both humanities undergrad. We read literature. We cared about art. And I think it's kind of the common bond that enabled us, even when we've been at odds with each other or been frustrated, because we both had a very deep sense of caring about more than just life.
You have this meaningful thread.
We had a meaningful
underneath
thread.
it all.
And I think it enabled us to see each other
Nathan,
through those hard times.
Question?
Yeah, he has.
I have a different opinion, and this is very illustrative. So no, it hasn't been easy. So on the one hand, I think you're right, but on the other hand, I think why it works is actually manifest in how we collaborated on this book. And I would say what enabled a successful collaboration. Number one, we're very different, and we clashed a ton because we approach the world differently. We see the world differently. Susannah, and what
you're independent individuals, and that's those are strong forces.
And the key to making that work is, instead of seeing the conflict, is to see the complementarity. Like, this person is different from me, and what's good about that difference? And so we started to get language for that. Like, oh, you're like the bird that flies high and sees the big picture, and I'm like the bird that's the woodpecker that pecks in. And actually, if I listen to you, even I might think it's crazy, the bird flying high, if I really took that seriously, I would actually start to see, ooh, she's got a reason. And then I can apply my skill, which is the woodpecker, of how does this fit? And does it fit here or there or there or there? So learning to appreciate that complementarity, I think, is super important. And then the second thing I would say, which was manifest in this book, is just trying over and over and over to get this right. And in the process of developing this book, if you'd watch this on like a little time-lapse video, you would just see so many iterations, Post-it notes, posted up, notes here, notes there, drafts, and then many drafts after that, and then teaching that, and then drafting again. You just see so much trying and iteration with a willingness to keep trying. Mm-hmm. So I would say complementarity and willingness to keep trying and learning.
I was also thinking, I wonder how many marriages crack under uncertainty. I just wonder how many marriages would have made it had they knew how to deal with uncertainty.
Oh, it's the arena for blaming, because, it feels so horrible that you're just like, oh, it must be your fault. Or, what
are we going to do? Yeah.
And Larry, I have to say, I don't want to, it can sound like we live this like really charmed life, et cetera. We're very lucky. But we have hard things happen to us too. And we just had some really, really hard things happen to us in the process of writing this book. And I will say, I totally used the tools. I literally said in this hard moment, what's the possibility I could pull out of this thing? And I screw up all the time. I blow it all the time. But like, some of my best moments are when I've asked that question, things are going to crap. What possibility could I pull out of this? And then and when I see the edge of that and I coax that out, even against sometimes my own frustration and anger or whatever it may be, fatigue, and coax that out, I walk away afterwards being like, that was a great moment. And so I think if we could where nobody's perfect, nobody's going to do this perfectly, but and get better at it, life gets more manageable, even hard things.
You just reminded me of a tool that I've used in my life, and maybe you alluded to it in your book, I'm not sure, but the question of what can be good here, or what good can come out of this, that question just immediately flips it and puts your mind in a seeking something more positive mode. Like, well, okay, let me look outside of the problem side of this. A long time ago, I spent a huge money on some license for a product that, once everything was set up, it wasn't a scam. It's just, there was a lot of falsehoods about it. And it was just this huge financial hole in my pocket. Long story short, turned it around. I mean, was able to get some lemonade out of the lemon. But at first I was just so devastated. Like I was struck, like I was stuck. What am I going to do? Hole in my pocket. I don't have this money. I don't have money. And just getting to a point of saying, all right, what about this can be good? And that may have not been the exact question at the time, but it was some form of that. Helped me figure out to do something with it that then turned out right. But yeah, and you reminded me of that, Nathan, of just the idea of asking a different question about the uncertainty. So where can people find you? Obviously, the book is everywhere books are sold, right?
We have a website, theupsideofuncertainty.com. And it's exciting because we just launched an asynchronous course that's meant for people to do at their own pace. And you can find the course there online to sign up. We've priced it super affordably because really our hope is to just get a lot of people these tools. And there's a free community. So people that are not taking the course or haven't read the book can still join in a discussion of just navigating uncertainty. And there's a lot of information on our website actually as well about the tools that people can just read about them there.
So yeah, book and website, same title, The Upside of Uncertainty.
I did sincerely like the book, and I tend to scratch my own itch on some of these interviews, but this is very timely as we're hitting a new year, what have you. So
thank you.
Be in touch.
Take care.
Yeah,
all right.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit LarryWeeks.com, and we will talk again soon.